Hi, everyone. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about our research on understanding user interactions with podcast recommendations delivered via voice. And this is a collaborative research with my colleague, Michael at Cornell Tech, our previous intern, Christina, who is now a PhD student at New York University, as well as my advisor, Deborah Estrin. So recently, we have seen the emergence of voice interfaces and devices in our daily lives, such as Apple Siri, Google Home, Amazon Alexa, and Microsoft Cortana, as well as the Comcast voice interface that we saw in the previous session. And among various things that people use these devices for, one of their major functionality is actually as an information portal for content. And people really like using these devices to consume content because voice is intimating, personal, and engaging, and it can be consumed in many hands-free scenarios. And in terms of the variety of the content, there is a range of content that is vocal in nature, such as podcasts, music, and audiobooks, and they have the great potential to gain audience and succeed through these emergent interfaces. However, if we look at the way that content recommendations are delivered through these two interfaces, they actually provide quite different user experience. So in the visual interface, as shown in the left figure of these slides, recommendations are usually presented as a list. Users can browse, skip, and scroll items as they wish. However, when it comes to voice interface, recommendations need to be delivered vocally and consumed linearly. And such an interface doesn't have the mechanism for users to do fine-grained control. So because of these unique properties, and based on our intuitions and some of the psychological facts, we may expect that users may spend longer time considering each recommendation. They may explore recommendation lists less, and as a result, they may end up choosing less lower-ranked items. And these are all valid concerns, and we all know that these will affect user satisfaction or experience with the recommendations. However, the question here is really, how much worse is this problem? What's the magnitude of the differences, and does it even matter? So to answer these questions, in this work, we conduct a between-subject randomized control study to compare voice and visual interfaces in terms of user interactions. And specifically, we quantify three interaction aspects: interaction efficiency, content exploration, and choices. By choices, I mean the item that users finally choose to consume. So in our study, the only independent variable or factor is interface. So from a high level, we divided the recruited participants into two groups, Group A and Group B. And then all the participants were required to look at the same list of podcast recommendations using the interface determined by the assigned group. So here, the group participants from Group A used the visual interface, and those from Group B used the voice interface. And then the visual interface that Group A used present a long list of podcast episode recommendations, and they were instructed to look at the list and then select an episode that she likes. And to encourage sort of the selections or choices according to users' true preferences, here we use a commitment mechanism. Basically, we require the user to listen to the selected episode for at least 5 minutes so that they can actually choose the episode not randomly. And similarly, the participants from Group B got the same instructions as Group A did, and they were instructed to make a choice using the same kind of a mechanism. However, instead of browsing the recommendation list, here the participants were provided with an audio snippet where the recommendations are actually spoken using the Amazon Polly text-to-speech service. And the audio can be paused as users wish, and in both cases, they can stop anytime and make a choice anytime. And after making a choice, they were required to listen to the selected episode for at least 5 minutes before moving on to the next stage. And finally, we present a simple user satisfaction survey, which basically contains several qualitative and quantitative questions. And we use such a survey to measure users' preference, or not preference, users' satisfactions towards their selected episode as well as the recommendation list. So at the end, we recruit 100 sort of qualified participants from the Amazon Mechanical Turk, and we randomly and evenly divided them into 50-50 into 2 groups. And in terms of the recommendation list, we leveraged the iTunes trending chart and take the top 150 episodes as the recommendation list. In other words, recommendation is popularity-based and not personalized in our study. So the first thing that we quantify is interaction efficiency. So here we sort of examine the number of recommendations that users were exposed to per minute. And so in the visual interface, this metric basically corresponds to the speed that users browse recommendations. And in the voice interface, this metric basically tells us how fast the recommendations were vocally spoken. And as you can see in these slides, the users consume visual recommendations 9 times as fast as those based on voice. And in other words, in order to go through the same recommendation list, users who use the voice interface will spend 9 times as much time. And then the question is, does such an inefficient interface really affect users' explorations? So to answer this question, we examine the maximum index number of the recommendations that users consider before making the decision. So intuitively, this tells us how deep a user will go into the recommendation list before making their decision. So it turns out that users on the visual interface explore 3 times as much as on the voice interface. And in other words, users using voice interface would not even notice there are many options out there. So the last question that we investigate is how much does such a voice interface will affect users' actual choices, given that the interface is much less efficient and users explore much less. So to answer this question, we here we look at the index number of the chosen episode. And intuitively, basically, this tells us how deep in the recommendation list are users' final choices. So as you can see in these slides, on the voice interface, users on average choose the 7th item, while on the visual interface, the average rank of the chosen episode is around 47. So in other words, the kind of interface really affects users' final choices, and the people who use the voice interface are less likely to choose the lower ranked items from the recommendation list. So before I go to talk about the implications of these findings, I want to share additional interesting finding that we didn't expect from the study. So as I presented before, earlier, so users in the voice interface, they listen to the recommendations. At some point, she sort of finds there's an episode that she liked. And then the question is, how many more episodes will she wait for or consider before she actually make up her mind? So from our study, empirically find the number is around 8. So in other words, users will wait for around, on average, 8 more episodes before actually making up her mind and start to listen to the episode. So to summarize, our study reveals that there's a significant difference between the visual interface and the voice interface in terms of user interactions. And the voice interface really significantly impacts user interactions with the recommendations. Therefore, we cannot ignore these differences when implementing a voice-based recommendations and just migrate what we did for the visual interface to voice. So, for example, voice interface really need better navigation techniques. So one of the pain points of voice interface is that it is very hard to navigate a recommendation list. And there's very little we can do if users know in advance that they're not interested in a particular episode. And also, so as we show in the study, users tend to be exposed to much less items in the voice interface. So it really brings up the importance of making the recommendations adaptive and diverse at the top ranks so that users can be more exposed to more options out there and make the wise decisions accordingly. So with this, I would like to wrap up my talk, and please refer to our paper for more experimental details and results. And now I'm happy to take any question. Thank you.
Hello. Hey, right here. Hi, I'm Bart from Clemson. You mentioned that you also asked about user satisfaction, but you didn't talk about it in your results section. I'm curious, did you find any differences between voice and visual?
Yes, thank you for your question so that I can have some time to talk about satisfaction. So yeah, we do measure the user satisfaction, but I think it's inconclusive. So we find some trend, like, I don't know which ones. So I think, so from a statistical point of view, there's no difference. So it's not statistically different in terms of both the satisfaction toward their choices as well as the recommendation list. But we do see a trend. I think, like, in the future, we need to have a larger sample study to determine whether there's any difference. But from our study, we can, like, make the conclusion which one is better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for you. So when you design your experiments, do you consider the gender differences? For example, maybe females are more likely voice, and males are more likely to read. Or the other thing is that I think the education also influences the result. More educated people, maybe they're more likely to read. People cannot read. The only choice is that they only listen, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's my question, okay?
Absolutely. I think all these things are very important. I think, like, a lot of the attributes that you mentioned will have effects on, like, both exploration, choices, as well as their satisfaction to the voice and visual interface. But so for our study, we do randomized control. So if we do randomized control, we assume that for those attributes, they're actually independent, and then they're, like, evenly distributed in both groups. But I totally agree with you. And in order to understand that, we need to actually do a more fine-grained controlled study that we basically split those users based on the genders or based on their educational level.
Hey, Longqi, one question about the voice interface. Does user has any control about that voice interface? For example, can they have a control to repeat the previous one, or they just listen?
In our study, no. They don't have the. They can pause the audio, so they can pause and then start to play again, but they don't have the option to, for example, repeat the audio. Yeah, in our study, but I think the question is totally open, like whether in the voice-based recommendation we should provide a repeat or any of these functions.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank the
you.
speaker once again.